Welcome into the PFF Fantasy Podcast. We are here. We're going to go game by game here, hit on all the key players and matchups to prepare you for Week 15. I am your host today, Kate Magdziuk. You could follow me on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. I am joined today by my co-host, John Macri, who unfortunately is a little bit under the weather. So I'm taking the reins for this one. We're about to go for a Kate Magdziuk ride. And we're going to get you all prepared for Week 15. Most of you are in your fantasy football playoffs. This might be Week 1. If you're in one of those weird leagues, you might be starting next week. But either way, this is kind of a critical matchup. We have no more bye weeks. We've got a full 16-game slate. We are going to bounce from game to game. Make sure you're all covered. We'll have the timestamps here in the comment section. So if you want to find a specific game, just scroll down, find the timestamp, and we'll get rolling. We're very excited to get through all of these matchups. But before we do, we want to give a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber. As a parent, you've had to learn many new skills to provide for your family, how to do copious amounts of laundry, meal plan for even the pickiest eaters, and now how to protect your family's financial future. Fabric by Gerber provides an easy one-stop shop for your family's financial needs, offering high-quality term life insurance policies plus other financial solutions in one easy online hub. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget, with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online. It's on your schedule. You go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric by Gerber to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, meetfabric.com/fantasy. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right. We are starting off our week with yet another Thursday night football matchup that literally nobody asked for. We've got the Los Angeles Chargers going to face the Las Vegas Raiders. We've got Easton Stick. We've got just a gross matchup. No Keenan Allen. We've got Aiden O'Connell on the other side of the ball. We've got a banged up Josh Jacobs. I have to imagine, John, that you are not excited for this game, nor am I.
I'm not excited. Sorry. Hello, everybody. Here I am. This is why I'm not talking. I sound like freaking Patty and Selma from The Simpsons. Yeah, not excited. Not excited. And we might not even get Josh Jacobs. It might be a Zamir White game. So yeah.
It's looking grim. And I mean, unfortunately for the defensive or the offense, right? Like on the Las Vegas Raiders side of the ball, like this should be a technically favorable matchup. Like Aiden O'Connell maybe could post some games. The Chargers are allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. You've got the Chargers defense allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. They've been susceptible through the air. So maybe you favor toward Devontae Adams. Maybe you get a little bit crazy here with Jacoby Myers, but I do think that obviously Jacoby Myers, given the ups and downs, the highs and lows, it's going to be kind of hard to trust him in such a crucial matchup. But how about on the other side of the ball? It's Austin Eckler. End of sentence. Is that fair?
I think so. And no Keenan Allen, like you said. I mean, maybe there's more targets there for Austin Eckler as well. So we did see Isaiah Spiller work in quite a bit last week, which was annoying, but I feel like you kind of have to start Austin Eckler. Even though he just hasn't been very efficient. There's really not a lot. Yeah.
And really, you're just kind of hoping for a touchdown. Now, there might not be many touchdowns in this game. Like I said, I think we know who we're starting. You're starting the bona fide studs in this matchup, and that is it. But we can move on. That means we can move on very quickly here because there's not a whole lot of fun things to talk about in that game. So let's move on to Saturday, where we actually have a couple more interesting matchups. We've got a 3-game slate on Saturday. Finally, the NFL knows we've got to invade every single day of the week at this point. Kicking off the day with the Minnesota Vikings traveling to face the Cincinnati Bengals, who, dare I say, have been kind of killing it as of late and rolling under quarterback Jake Browning. Because I don't mean to alarm anybody, but Jake Browning has been a top 5 quarterback in back-to-back weeks. Can you trust him again?
I am. I don't mind him as a streaming option this week. Like you said, he's been solid, and I wrote about him in the O-line D-line matchup article this week. And it is an advantage for the Bengals. He's been really good from a clean pocket so far this year, 86.4 passing grade, which would put him right behind Jalen Hurts, if not for a smaller sample size. So do like that. 4 of his 5 passing touchdowns from a clean pocket as well. 81% of his passing yards from a clean pocket. So I don't mind Jake Browning this week as a streaming option. He's kind of earned it.
And perhaps like the tiebreaker there. So notably on the injury report this week is Jamar Chase, who suffered an ankle injury last week. He was listed on the team's estimated like initial practice report as a non-participant, but did get in a limited practice on Wednesday, which is a good sign just for his overall trend. Now, maybe that's kind of the tiebreaker. If he's available, maybe you feel a little bit better about rolling out Jake Browning. Temperature check on T. Higgins, because I think maybe that's the biggest question mark. He's had his ups and downs, but coming off a 2 reception, 72-yard game, still hasn't scored a touchdown since week 2, where he posted 2 of them. But we've seen a little bit more consistency from T. Higgins in recent weeks. Over the last 4 games, has had 69 or more receiving yards in all but one of those matchups. Has been targeted at a decent rate, nothing elite, but perhaps we see a little bit more involvement from him if Jamar Chase is limited in any capacity. What's your level of trust on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being he's a must start in my lineup in this very crucial week, to 1 being if I have any other option, I'm starting?
Oh, I think I'd go with probably a 4. Oh my God, this sounds so silly. I'm so sorry, guys. It's
4 is a
low.
sad number. That's
It's
a very sad number.
Yeah, and I worry, like, you look at his playing time, his target rate, everything is lower for him than what we're used to with T. Higgins, and that's the part that concerns me, at least. And I know Jamar Chase says he's going to play, so I don't know. I just he's been somebody that hasn't earned that trust, I guess, for me, and it's been better, but still not great. It's just Minnesota's not terrible either, so I don't know. Yeah, 4. I'm still sad with T. Higgins, so 4.
I think that's fair. Minnesota allowing the 13th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. You mentioned not a tough matchup. They've been much more difficult, much more challenging against the run this game. Not going to be helpful for, Joe Mixon, who has kind of been on the struggle bus in terms of efficiency as of late. But we've seen him utilized plenty in the screen game, which that has worked out very well to their favor. I think the interesting part is probably Chase Brown's usage. I've been trending that very closely on the PFF rushing report. Comes out every Wednesday. But we've actually seen back-to-back weeks where Chase Brown, rookie running back for the Bengals, has had 10 plus touches. He's been involved as a receiver a little bit as well, also getting in on that screen game. Again, not a threat to Joe Mixon at this point, but he's a name that, maybe if you're in a deep dynasty league and you're kind of hurting for options, he might not be the worst play, especially, if they continue to utilize that screen game. I'm going to project the run will mostly be inefficient. Getting those yardage from the running backs on the ground might be a challenge. So getting their backs involved as receivers, I think, could be a good idea and could favor Chase Brown. On the other side of the ball, we've got we've got a lot of ugly. Nick Mullins, starting at quarterback. We had Josh Dobbs benched last week, which broke my heart. He was one of my favorite plays. Didn't pull through for me, my man. Oh, despite the options too, despite the receiving options, you did have Justin Jefferson in his return from an ankle injury, got forced from last week's outing with a chest injury, ended up going to the hospital, checking out like some precautionary, making sure he had no big time internal injuries. It sounds like he's probably going to play in this outing. I think is if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly here. So at least Nick Mullins will have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, who is my tight end one on the week. You have the Cincinnati Bengals, who have just been hemorrhaging fantasy points to the tight end, allowing the most points to the position in the entire league this season. TJ Hawkinson, man, smash start. I'd like to hit the over on pretty much any prop bet available on TJ Hawkinson this week, because I think he's going to have a big time day. But level of confidence in Justin Jefferson, managing that chest injury, is there any kind of hesitancy about loading him back into your lineup as a wide receiver one?
There's some concern, right? Like I probably have more as like a wide receiver 2 this week. Like I think I'd feel worse benching Justin Jefferson and him going for like 130 and a touchdown or something like that, as opposed to starting him and him getting, 2 for 26 again, something like that. So I'm still starting him for the most part across the board. But yeah, there is at least some hesitancy for him this week for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe just tempering those expectations. You're not sitting Justin Jefferson by any means, but just maybe tempering those expectations a little bit. Jordan Addison, I think a perfectly fine play. Anything else in this matchup that we want to hit on, or should we move on to the ugly Bears and Browns? What do you think?
The only other thing, I think Alexander Mattison is unlikely to play.
Yep.
It seems like, right? So Ty Chandler could be, a flex play or like an RB3, high-end RB3 type option this week. So that would be pretty much it for me.
Great call out. The Bengals have allowed a league high 16% explosive run rate this season, giving up 4.8 yards per carry to opposing runners. That's the second highest in the league. Could be an interesting spot, and could be a spot where, like, if he does what we would hope he does, fantasy managers, maybe we get some more appearances from Ty Chandler in the future. Obviously, like, Alexander Mattison has struggled with efficiency this season. I think, Chandler could be the better option there overall. Moving on, Chicago Bears at Cleveland Browns. This could be another like kind of icky outing. AFC North football, it's ugly, it's defense, it's gnarly, right? But you look at the Chicago Bears coming into kind of a similar environment to what they're used to dealing with. So like not necessarily foreign to being in, some cold, nasty weather off the lake. Chicago Bears, they should feel, relatively at home up here in Cleveland. But obviously, you've got a pretty challenging defense against the Cleveland Browns. Luckily for across the board, luckily for this defense, the Browns are dealing with a number of injuries in the defense, both on the defensive line and in the secondary, that I think could make this matchup a little bit easier, even if it is, a challenging road environment. I don't think you're really hesitating here. You're starting Justin Fields, you're starting DJ Moore, the yards after the catch. Keep an eye on DJ Moore, limited in practice, suffered an ankle injury, but he did come back after suffering that injury last week. So doesn't seem to be an issue moving forward. I think you're starting Cole Kmet. Now, the only question is, can you start the running backs in the system? Because the barometer from a week to week basis has been all over the board for the Chicago Bears backfield. 1 minute it's Roschon Johnson, the next it's Deontay Foreman, then it's Khalil Herbert. I don't think you can trust this backfield in your fantasy football playoffs in any capacity.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm staying away. If I have to start somebody, it's Deontay Foreman, but like I'm very upset about having to put him in a line.
I mean, it's sad because, like, John, it's so frustrating because if you had all of these running backs, if you had one running back getting, 70% of the running back touches, they'd probably have a really, really solid fantasy day, but that just hasn't been the case. And again, it like, especially going up against this Cleveland defense, even banged up, I don't think it's a wise choice. But on the Cleveland side of the ball, Joe Flacco gonna get his start. He was named the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns rest of season. You have Jerome Ford, you've got Amari Cooper, David Njoku, who's coming off a 2-touchdown outing. Do you just start the Cleveland Browns? Like, can we officially kind of designate them as an offense that apparently we don't have to worry about all that much, regardless of who's at quarterback?
I think so, kind of. I mean, Amari Cooper's been pretty inconsistent this year. That's it, probably the player I'm most concerned about. Like, and it's mostly had to do with the struggles of the offense, but you're not too worried about it here against Chicago. So I'm fine starting him. And then Jerome Ford, he's finished as a top 24 PPR running back in 6 straight weeks. So really, really solid there. Nothing too high, but he hasn't fallen out of that range for you. So he's giving you consistent production.
Yeah, and even Amari Cooper last week, they got the win over the Jaguars, had 14 total targets. That was a season high for Amari Cooper here. Only posted 77 receiving yards, no touchdowns, but you're happy to see that the touchdown production is there, right? Like a couple of them went to David Njoku. At least Joe Flacco's throwing touchdowns, which is a plus. So hopefully we can get a couple of them to Amari Cooper this week, but again, kind of a simple offense. I think we know exactly what we're going for. Jerome Ford, any sort of concerns for you? I think I'm tempering expectations for Jerome Ford. Like you said, a top 24 PPR running back. I think a low end RB2 is probably what to expect against the Chicago Bears defense that's buttoned up a little bit against opposing running backs. But other than that, I think that's this matchup. So we should probably head into Saturday night football. Is that like a technical term? We've got the Buccaneers traveling to face the Green Bay Packers. Now, this couldn't be a better spot for the Green Bay Packers to bounce back. They struggled a little bit. We saw Jordan Love make some faulty throws, I'll say, against the New York Giants in week 14, but you're going up against that Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary, which they're allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. This could be a spot where you get to take advantage of that struggling secondary, that unhealthy secondary for the Buccaneers. I think you can go back to Jordan Love. I've got him ranked as like a low end QB1 in this matchup, just given the fact they're at home. Given the fact that this just defense has kind of struggled in general. And on the back of that, how about Jayden Reed, who's, I guess, RB1 for the Green Bay Packers at this point? I called the game for him. I thought the fantasy production last week was going to come via the air, but no, it turns out Jayden Reed, pretty much bona fide RB1 for this offense, had 38 total rushing yards and a touchdown last week, amounted to 65 total scrimmage yards, including 8 receptions for a whopping 3.4 yards per reception average. So you don't love the efficiency, but again, PPR, baby. Jayden Reed, are we full steam ahead?
I'm fine with it. Yeah. I mean, going against a more zone heavy team this week as well. Like, we've seen Romeo Doubs and Jayden Reed be better against zone than man. So that's been nice. And then Christian Watson did not practice today on Thursday, so doesn't seem like he'll be getting in there. So yeah, I don't mind Jayden Reed this week. Don't mind Romeo Doubs either. And then I just want to know, I think we skipped over Denver, Detroit. I think that's the Saturday night game, but we could go back to it. There's no big deal at all.
We did. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah,
No,
this is
it's fine.
Actually, you know what? We'll close out Buccaneers, Packers, and then we'll switch back. But very good catch. Broncos at Lions, a much better Saturday night football matchup than the Bucks versus the Packers. On the other side of the ball, so on the Green Bay Packers to close them out, I think, Jordan Love, a fine start, going to upgrade him a little bit if you do see Christian Watson back in the mix. It doesn't seem likely that he's going to be a go for week 15 either. Sat out of practice on Wednesday. So if Christian Watson is out, I think that's just a little bit of a bump to Romeo Doubs, to Jayden Reed. But again, kind of this a good spot for this Packers offense to take advantage of the secondary a little bit. AJ Dillon, he's been, involved as a leading rusher technically, but hasn't amounted to just a ton of consistent fantasy production. He's still scored just a single touchdown all season long. Had 78 or more yards in each of his last 3 games, but that's kind of it. Like you're going for volume, you're going for that volume. That's pretty much all you're going to look at for our friend AJ Dillon here. Anybody else that you're actually considering? How about like Tucker Kraft? Any interest in Tucker Kraft against this Buccaneer secondary? Did play 100% of offensive snaps last week.
Not like,
No.
it depends what my other options are, but I don't know. In deeper leagues, there is one league actually where I will play him. But it's such a deep league that I really don't have a choice as far as like offensive flex players go. So yeah, I don't hate it. Like I'm not too upset about him. There's definitely worse options. So I'm fine putting Tucker Kraft in there for like deeper leagues. I think Nate has him as tight end 16 this week. I feel that feels about right to me.
I think that's fair. The you never know. You never know what's going to happen with these tight ends. It could be like one catch for a 5-yard touchdown, and you might be looking at a tight end 1 performance. So spin the wheel, see what you get. On the other side of the ball, we'll close out with the Buccaneers before circling back to the Broncos Lions game. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, interesting spot. It's going to be a tough, hostile environment, leaving the depths and warmth of Florida, traveling up to Lambeau Field. That's going to be a challenging environment. The Green Bay defense been a little bit more buttoned up against quarterbacks, 26 in fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, 25th in fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Now, worth noting, Chris Godwin has missed 2 consecutive practices this week with a knee injury. So don't love hearing that, but boy, oh boy, I don't know. Mike Evans might just emerge from this game with 50 plus targets. I don't know. Like he might be I'm sure he'll be the go-to guy in this game, but that volume might just be enough to make up for some of those efficiencies that the Packers defense have forced against opposing wide receivers this year.
I like it. I mean, Chris Godwin, he's really been a ghost all year long. So let's throw those targets to Mike Evans and Rachaad White and let those guys be the stars again without any concerns there. So I'm with you.
Yeah, Rachaad White might catch 50 balls himself in this outing. Like, we've said it before. They've kind of substituted the run game a little bit for, getting Rachaad White involved as a receiver. That's kind of been their go-to. Now, maybe if Chris Godwin is out in this one, Cade Otton could be a sneaky backup play. We've seen him lead the team incredibly in routes run this season. Ranks 3rd in terms of total target share, 62 targets, 43 receptions for 389 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns this season. Could be an interesting spot from a volume perspective if we see Chris Godwin out. Obviously, you're playing Rachaad White. Rachaad White is a bona fide every week starter at this point. You don't have to ask questions. He's a top 5 running back. Not really a whole ton else on the Buccaneers side of the ball. I don't think you're considering Baker Mayfield at this point. You're not considering, you're not getting cute in the fantasy playoffs with some of the depth plays at wide receiver for the Buccaneers. No way, no how. I think we can put this matchup in the rearview mirror. Let's circle back to Saturday Night Football. Denver Broncos at Detroit Lions. This actually might be one of my favorite matchups of the week. I'm actually excited to watch this game, which I didn't expect that to be the case earlier this season. You have Russell Wilson, who obviously has had his ups and downs, could be in an interesting spot. He's going to play in a dome against the Lions, along the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. You have on the other side of the ball, you have, Jared Goff, who's played well at home, going up against this Denver Broncos run defense that can't stop anything from anybody. I don't know. This might be a interesting game.
think it could be a fun one. Yeah, I'm with you. It's kind of a nice matchup, and I mean, I don't really have like a ton of questions for these guys. Like we're starting Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then outside of that, I mean, Jameson Williams maybe is a deep play, but ah, the Lions are pretty easy.
The Lions are pretty easy. I will say I'm tempering expectations just a little bit in terms of Jared Goff's production in this outing. The Broncos have been forcing some turnovers as of late. They've been pretty productive on that front. We've seen before Jared Goff can be occasionally prone to some turnovers. So this could, I think this is actually a little bit more of a challenging matchup than most people are giving credit through the air. They've allowed just 4 different quarterbacks this season to have scored, or sorry, 3 quarterbacks this season to have scored 20 or more fantasy points. And that was in the first half of the season. Like the second half of the season for this Denver Broncos secondary has kind of been I feel like one of the more quiet narratives. Like we're not really talking about what they've done and what they've held some of these opposing quarterbacks to. Justin Herbert, obviously, like dealt with a finger issue, was forced early from that game, but on 17 pass attempts total, just 1.84 fantasy points. You had Patrick Mahomes, 5.6 fantasy points, Josh Allen, 14.3. This has been a really challenging matchup just across the board. And I think it's because of their propensity for generating turnovers at this point.
Yeah, I like that. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, yeah, I definitely love that call. And so, would you rather start Russell Wilson over Jared Goff this week if you had to choose between the two?
I would. I like this matchup against the Detroit Lions secondary a bit better than I do the Denver Broncos. And that's hard for me to say because I have absolutely adored Jared Goff this year. He has been one of, I think, the most underrated quarterbacks just from a play perspective, maybe not from a fantasy perspective. But, you know, Russell Wilson, he's had kind of the steady stream of production. I think kind of generally underrated in terms of like his consistency at this point in the season. Hasn't had a ton of like boom games, but since their bye, he has been a top 12 quarterback in 3 of 5 games. This has been, you know, Russell Wilson, low end
Yeah.
QB1. And sometimes that's all you need if you are starting some more volatile assets in other places in your lineup.
Yeah, he's been consistent at least. Like you said, like over the past 5 games, he's either finished as QB11 or QB18. Nothing in between, it looks like,
Nothing.
according to our weekly finishes page here. So it's pretty funny to see. But he, like you said, at least there's some consistency there, and it's a decent matchup here for fantasy quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think this could be an interesting spot. Now, you know, in terms of the run game, you know, Javonte Williams, I'm not overly excited about at this point. You know, I think we've kind of seen, you know, we've seen what he is, right? He's had some opportunity for volume, hasn't been overly efficient. He kind of started this year hot. And since, you know, like, I don't know, week 10 or so, it just feels like he's getting some volume, he's getting some carries, but they just haven't amounted to much, which you know, you love to see. He got the rushing touchdown just last week, which helped his fantasy day. But in general, I think what you're probably expecting from Javonte Williams up against this rushing defense, you're hoping for efficiency. The Lions are much tougher against running backs than they are through the air. So I think that's probably going to be where they look to attack the Lions. I think, you know, you're starting Cortland Sutton, the touchdown machine. Jerry Jeudy, no. Is that fair? No.
Yeah,
Like, do
just
I
a
need to
just a
give
no for
more
me, though.
analysis?
Yeah, no, no.
Yeah, Jerry Jeudy, like I understand he has some name value, and on paper this looks like a decent matchup. But you know, Jerry Jeudy, that 2 of the last 3 weeks has finished as a wide receiver 77 or worse. So that will be a no. Anything else that I'm missing in this line or this Saturday night football matchup?
Nope, works for me.
No. All right, let's keep rolling through on to Sunday. We're skipping back to Sunday. I'm sorry for the time warp here, folks. Let's talk about my Pittsburgh Steelers traveling to face the Indianapolis Colts. the Steelers and the Colts, they're both in these win now positions where like it's critical, right? This situation is dire. Both of them desperately need a win in order to keep their playoff hopes largely alive. You have the Steelers coming in. They've had a little bit of a mini bye, a little bit more time to maybe game plan the offense with quarterback Mitch Trubisky. Remember, coming out of week 13, they only had a few days prep with Mitch Trubisky under center. So maybe we see some of these offensive kinks worked out a little bit for the Steelers. I think the best mode of attack is going to be getting to Indy through the run. Could be a really nice day for Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. I prefer Najee in this instance just because of, some of those more valuable carries in the red zone. But I think both of these running backs could have a solid day against the Colts, who have allowed plenty of touchdowns on the ground, third most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs.
Yeah, 19 rushing touchdowns, like you said, tied for the second most in the league, and I'm fine. Yeah, I'm good with putting Najee in there. I mean, I know that the split in snaps has been pretty even, but I mean, Najee's getting the carries, Warren's getting the targets, Najee's getting the goal line work. They're both getting their opportunities. So, in a positive matchup like this, I think it's a nice spot for them this week.
Yeah, keep an eye on the receiving core. So Deontay Johnson popped up on the injury report this week with a knee injury. I believe he returned to practice on Thursday after sitting out on Wednesday, but just keep an eye on his availability since that is a new injury. But I think Deontay Johnson probably, if he's active, the safer of the two Pittsburgh wide receivers. If Deontay Johnson's out, though, I think we could be in a very interesting spot for George Pickens. Obviously, there's been a ton of frustration there. Colts, they've been okay against opposing wide receivers, ranked bottom 10 in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So this isn't a great matchup to target. But, I think if Johnson's out or, they project him to be limited in any way, that could be just what George Pickens need to kind of get that volume back where it needs to be to produce.
Yeah, I think that would be like the kind of saving grace for George Pickens. I'm not interested in him at all if Deontay Johnson's playing, but if Johnson's out, yeah, he becomes like a wide receiver 3, like you said. The only thing with both of these guys too, they've both been very ineffective against zone coverage, and Indy, the most zone heavy team in the NFL this year. Like you said, not an amazing secondary. They're not terrible either. So it just makes it a little bit tougher, but that would be the scenario where I'd feel comfortable starting George Pickens. Otherwise, he's not making it in the lineup for me.
Bummer. Bummer. There's so much potential here. So much potential. There's so much talent in this offense, but they can't seem to unlock it. One last question on this offense before we move on. What is your level of faith in Pat Freiermuth? Can he get it done? And is there any world, like how desperate do you need to be before you consider starting Pat Freiermuth in week 15, probably week 1 of your fantasy playoffs?
Yeah, not full desperation mode, but I mean, he's probably not inside my top 10 to 12 tight ends this week. But he's not too far. He's on the fringes of that, basically, right? So yeah, it's just hard. Like, how much do you trust the offense, right? Under Mitchell Trubisky, the passing offense, that is, right? So that's where the biggest issue comes in for me. And that's why he's probably outside that range. But you like the talent. There could be opportunity, like you said, Deontay Johnson banged up. Yeah, I'm not too desperate. If I have to start him, there's plenty of leagues where he probably makes the lineup for me.
Pat Freiermuth does lead the entire Steelers, like all of their skill position players in PFF receiving grade against zone coverage this season, which you just mentioned. The Colts are playing, at a league high rate. So perhaps they find a little bit of wiggle room there, but I think it's safe to say the best approach for the Steelers offense is to roll with the running backs and expect kind of RB2, RB3 production with the knowledge that you might just squeak out a RB1 performance if they can find the end zone. How about on the Indy side of the ball? So I think I've all been pleasantly surprised by the Indianapolis Colts with Gardner Minshew under center this year. The offense has kind of been rolling, and you know what? Who's been a big part of that has been Michael Pittman, who since Gardner Minshew took over in week 6 has been the overall wide receiver 7, which boggles my mind. I don't think I realized how effective he's been, but man, you look at his target volume averaging 11.5 targets per game since week 6. You know, it's an interesting spot. The Steelers secondary, they've had their ups and downs this year. I imagine he's going to see a little bit of Joey Porter, which could be, could mean some tough sleddings here, but if they can get him going in the little middle of the field where they're decimated at linebacker, maybe we see a little bit of yardage, but maybe this projects as more of a Josh Downs game.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, I have a lot more faith, obviously, in Michael Pittman. That's not saying much. He's been a target monster, like you said. Josh Downs and Alec Pierce are the guys that I'm probably more concerned about. Like Downs, I'm probably not starting him. Like I'm just looking, like he's been pretty ineffective against man coverage. The Steelers, as we know, top 10 team in deploying man coverage, but they're not great at it either, right? They've earned just a 49.1 team coverage grade while in man. That ranks 28th. And I think there's opportunity there for Josh Downs, but like again, deeper league, probably wide receiver 4, offensive flex option for me. I'm not like really trying to get him into I don't know. Am I way off there? Are you more optimistic?
I'm a little bit more optimistic for Josh Downs. Now, the biggest question, and that purely comes from the fact that he plays the majority of the snaps out of the slot, which, I mean, the Steelers, I don't know what they're going to do with this mini bye, if they're going to be able to come up with some answers, but I mean, just decimated across the middle of the field. So that's going to be their one area of weakness. I think their biggest area of weakness. We saw, I think the tight ends in particular have been able to take full advantage of the Steelers. Since Cole Holcomb, starting inside linebacker for the Steelers, went down with a season-ending injury in week 10, like the tight ends have kind of feasted on this team. Maybe we see one of these tight ends, and again, too risky to probably start any of these guys in your season-long leagues. But the Steelers, because of that, have been a great matchup for tight ends over the last 4 weeks or so. So desperation play, YOLO play. I think, take a flyer on one of these guys. I thought it would be Kylan Granson last week, and ended up being Mo Alley Cox who got the touchdown. Kylan Granson still leads this Colts tight end core in terms of targets, routes run. Theoretically, if there's a guy, it should be him, but we'll see how that shakes out. Zach Moss, you have him going up against the Steelers defense, which again, kind of been a so-so matchup. Like we've seen these ups and downs throughout the season with this Pittsburgh Steelers rushing defense. Zeke Elliott, top 5 performance here in week 14 against the Steelers, largely on the back of some volume. But, Zach Moss, he's one of those runners that I think is like a punishing guy. And he's one of those guys that, boy, as the game wears down, he's going to cause some vulnerabilities there in that defense. I think Zach Moss could be a pretty solid play here. I'm installing him as like a clear-cut RB2 this season, despite the inefficiencies we've seen over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, you just love the volume with Zach Moss, right? Like he's dominating the snaps, dominating the touches there for Indianapolis. Jonathan Taylor's not going to play, so I'm with you. I think he's right inside that range for me. I mean, there's potential, like RB2 with upside, like you said.
I love it. All right, let's move on. New York Jets at Miami Dolphins. Now, the New York Jets, you're probably starting Breece Hall just because his name is Breece Hall. You're starting Garrett Wilson for, I think some of that volume potential. Nothing else on the Jets side of the ball. Don't think we have to spend a lot of time there. John, you're nodding your head in agreement. So we'll move right along to the Miami Dolphins. This is actually an interesting spot. So you look at the Dolphins, they've been performing well at home. They're in a situation where they'd ideally like to bounce back after a surprising loss in week 14. But New York Jets, who they did demolish just a couple weeks ago, have been pretty solid against, especially quarterbacks. Tua had 7.8 fantasy points in their first meeting just a few weeks ago. Again, Tua does have some of those home road splits, but I don't know that this offense might be in any better position going against Tua. I don't think you can trust Tua here in week 15. Even despite the fact that he's at home, you have Tyreek Hill, who's on the injury report with an ankle issue, had him going in and out of the lineup all last week. We'll see how he kind of, responds and how that ankle responds through practice this week. But I think it's reasonable to expect that he's not at 100%. All of that combined has me looking at, Tua as a no-go. Really solid first half of the season, but since then, it largely been pretty dang disappointing. And I don't know that his ceiling is necessarily worth the likely low floor that we could see from him in week 15.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid Tua where I can. One of my main leagues, I'm in the playoffs and I have no choice but to start him. And it sucks. I don't feel good about it at all. I know Nate wrote him up as a sit as well. All the reasons that you just said as well, right? So going against the Jets and last time he played them, the numbers weren't good. Nate also highlighted only 3 quarterbacks have thrown multiple touchdowns against the Jets defense in a game. And they've even held Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, and CJ Stroud and others to 1 score or less. So you add the Tyreek Hill ankle injury into that as well. It sucks. Not that optimistic about Tua. And I mean, yeah, even Tyreek Hill, like you're definitely starting Tyreek Hill. Never sit him, but there's definitely some reason to temper expectations here this week.
Yeah, you don't love to temper expectations for any of these guys across the board. Now, I do think, generally speaking, the Miami Dolphins, knowing the propensity the Jets have for causing turnovers, Tua threw 2 picks in their first meeting back in week 12. They're probably going to continue to funnel this game through the ground. And this week, I think it's a great matchup for Raheem Mostert. Great spot for Devin Achane to have a solid fantasy day. Now, like last week was the first kind of down performance you saw from Devin Achane. And I think what better spot to build him back up. I'm starting both of these guys with confidence. Yeah. And I think I feel better starting Jalen Waddle if Tyreek Hill is, designated as questionable heading into this game, and it seems like he'll be limited, but not super excited about anybody outside of the running backs on this Miami Dolphins roster.
Yep,
all right, moving on. New York Giants at New Orleans Saints. Kind of a stinker in this one. I'm not super excited about this game. I don't know about you, John. I don't know. We've got Tommy DeVito, who's kind of killing it, very oddly enough. I don't know what was in his Wheaties that day, what was in his mama's spaghetti in week 14, but NFC Player of the Week, Tommy DeVito. Any sort of faith that we're actually going to see a repeat performance from Tommy DeVito? This is a challenging matchup. The Saints are a very challenging defense, along 23rd, ranked 23rd in fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 30th in points per game to opposing wide receivers. Any trust level there for Tommy DeVito, any of his wide receivers, anybody outside of Saquon Barkley?
No, not really. I mean, I know Darren Waller's probably coming back this week. Yeah, Saquon Barkley. I know. As fun as Tommy DeVito is, and the Tommy Cutlets memes, and yeah, a lot of the inarticulate Italian noises memes floating around there. As fun as that is, I don't want to be playing Tommy DeVito in the fantasy playoffs. No, thank you. Yeah, Wan'Dale Robinson maybe coming off his best game, probably the lone desperation play if I have to pick somebody.
Wan'Dale Robinson is one of my five high risk, high reward players that I'm outlining in an article dropping Friday on PFF. You have Wan'Dale, who has been kind of dominating plays out of the slot for the Giants this season, now going toe to toe with Alontae Taylor, who has just bled yards after the catch in slot coverage this year. So I think this is a good matchup for Wan'Dale, especially coming off a really successful outing. How about on the Saints side of the ball? This is a much easier matchup, right? Technically speaking, on paper, should be a better game. I think we've seen some improvements in the Giants defense as of late, but not excited about Derek Carr, of course. You start Alvin Kamara, you start Chris Olave. Are there any other players in this offense that you're giving a shot in your lineup?
Maybe Rashid Shaheed if he's healthy, but I don't feel great about that either because he might be limited. So no, not really. Taysom Hill, another guy. Oh God, I'm so sorry, everybody. Taysom Hill, coming off injury as well. No, I think it's Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara for me. I don't want a part of it. No.
Okay. No, that's perfect analysis. I think that's all we need. Nobody really needs to listen to us talk more about Derek Carr than we really need to. Now, we're going to take a quick break. Let's talk to you about Prize Picks. This podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will go more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. And with the basketball season here, you can pick a combo projections with football, basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections, including 2 or more players from different sports, different leagues. For example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce at 10.5 combined 3-pointers made and receptions. Go to prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy. Use code PFF fantasy for a first time deposit match. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy and use code PFF fantasy for a first deposit match of up to $100. I know what I am kind of looking at this point in the week. I'm looking at Logan Thomas, more than 32 receiving yards going up against the Rams, who have been a favorable matchup for opposing tight ends. John, do you have any picks for us to send off our listeners before they head over to prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy to sign up for their account?
Nice. Yeah, I like the Logan Thomas one. I'm going with Austin Eckler to get more than 31.5 receiving yards here on Thursday night. I know we got Easton Stick at quarterback. There's going to be no Keenan Allen. We talked about it, right? Should at least see a handful of targets this week. Hopefully get over that total. He's done it 60% of his games this year. Not a ton. I know he's been efficient, but feeling decent about Austin Eckler's receiving totals this week. They even have a bonus version of that this year or this week where you can pick Eckler for over 49.5 receiving yards and win up to 100 times your entry. So if you're feeling really confident about Austin Eckler this week, that might be the play for you as well.
I love it. I love it. Those are your picks. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy for a first deposit match up to $100. Let's move on. Houston Texans at Tennessee Titans, the clash of the AFC South. Could be without CJ Stroud on the Houston side of the ball, which means Davis Mills at quarterback, no Tank Dell, maybe no Nico Collins, who's dealing with a hamstring or calf injury. Then you have Dalton Schultz, who's been managing a hamstring injury. I don't know. We might see Devin Singletary and Brevin Jordan combine for 83 targets in this game. How about anybody that you think you can reliably start in this offense if it is Davis Mills at quarterback?
No, I really, this sucks because CJ Stroud's been so good. I know, last week wasn't great, but it looks like, just looking at the practice report, Nico Collins did not participate in practice on Thursday, and CJ Stroud still in the concussion protocol, not practicing on Thursday either. So with that, Noah Brown is an option at wide receiver, but he's super risky, especially considering, zeros in 2 straight weeks. But we've also seen him have a couple monster games in the 2 weeks prior to that. It's such a risk. I don't know that I'm willing to take it. But there, like you said, there's not going to be a ton of people for Davis the Neck Mills to throw to this week.
Davis the Neck Mills. If anybody hasn't seen a picture of Davis Mills' neck, please pause the podcast, go to whatever web service app you have on your phone and Google Davis Mills' neck. You will know exactly what we're talking about. It is a tree trunk. But I think you're right. Kind of hit the nail on the head there. We could probably move on pretty quickly here. Now we'll talk about the Tennessee Titans, who, they get the Texans, allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, have been able to force some turnovers, and they look good on defense, but on paper, have allowed some points to fantasy running backs. We have, Will Levis, who coming off a really outstanding performance in week 14. I don't think you can trust it here heading into week 15. As much as I love Will Levis, I love what he offers in terms of, upside on the ground. I don't think you can trust really any of this heading into, week 15, even in what was easily by far the best game of his career. 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 327 passing yards. Like, whatever. You're starting DeAndre Hopkins. The only other question, I think, you have Derrick Henry. Can you start Tajay Spears in a tough, if you're hurting, right? Like, Tajay Spears, 89 receiving yards last week, 8 targets, 6 receptions, had another 29 yards on the ground on 7 rush attempts. How desperate do you have to be before you start considering Tajay Spears in your lineup?
Yeah, for PPR leagues, I mean, that's really the only place you're considering him, right? I mean, yeah, deeper league flex, that's like, I could see him being in starting lineups this week. For people that don't have a ton of depth, maybe they drafted Tajay Spears in a dynasty league, something like that. You could be putting him in there and hoping for that target volume again. We'll see. It's going to depend on game script, right? What's Davis Mills going to do for the Texans? Is he going to be able to give them a lead? Is it going to be similar to last week, where the Titans have a lead against a Dolphins team and they got to try to maintain that? I don't know. Tajay Spears, not a ton of confidence, but like it's really just like deep league, maybe dynasty flex, probably the only spot that I could picture him being in starting lineups.
I think that's totally fair. Chig Okonkwo, if you're desperate, I don't love Chig either. Again, lots of ups and downs, mostly downs. So I don't think you can trust him. We'll move on to another South matchup. This time in the NFC, we've got the Atlanta Falcons going up against the Carolina Panthers. This is kind of an interesting game. It could be a spot where we see Bijan Robinson absolutely blow up. You have the Panthers, who are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs. Meanwhile, these teams really haven't had to throw a whole ton against the Panthers because they've been so efficient in allowing yards in the ground. So I think, generally speaking, fading the passing game here for the Atlanta Falcons. We have Desmond Ridder, who does not throw touchdowns on the road. I'm not counting for another career day here from Drake London. I'm considering him a wide receiver 3 borderline flex play at this point. You're starting Bijan, and I think if you've been rolling with Kyle Pitts to this point, sure, why not? But other than that, not all that excited about Atlanta's side of the ball this week, even despite some of the successes they found in the passing game back in week 14.
Yeah, it makes a difference when you're trailing, right? Or you're in a tight game and you have to pass to keep up. They're going against the Panthers this week, who have 1 win on the season. Probably not going to have to pass that much. So, I'm with you in fading the passing offense as well, and just rolling with Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Bijan Robinson, I think, could be in a spot. I think he walks away with a touchdown here in week 15. On the other side of the ball, we've got the Carolina Panthers, who they continue to kind of struggle finding their identity on offense. You do have Chuba Hubbard, who, since they've cleaned house and we've got some new coaching staff, they have really committed to the run here with Chuba Hubbard. Over the last 2 games, he has had 25 touches in each of those outings, 90 plus scrimmage yards in both of those outings. I think from a volume standpoint, you definitely start Chuba Hubbard. Other than that, I think you can consider at this point Adam Thielen. I'm not excited about Adam Thielen as I once was, especially considering this kind of renewed emphasis on the run game. But I think, if you're in a full PPR league, you can probably consider Thielen, and that's about it from this team.
Agreed.
Cool. Let's move on. This is one of another game that I'm pretty excited for. The Washington Commanders at the Los Angeles Rams. The Washington Commanders defense, let's be honest, what defense? Like, they don't play defense. So you're looking at a prime opportunity for Matthew Stafford to keep the ball rolling. He has been a quarterback one, I think, in each of the last 4 weeks. I think he keeps the ball rolling here in, week 15. I think he's pretty much as close to like a must start as you could get for the tier of quarterback that he's in. Unless you have like a Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, or Brock Purdy, I think Stafford's in your lineup and he needs to be. Commanders allowing the league allowing a league high 30 passing touchdowns, leading the league in yards allowed, allowing scores on a league high 46.9% of opposing drives this season. Not forcing a ton of turnovers. This is just going to be a yummy, delicious delight for the LA Rams. I'm starting Stafford, Puka, starting Cooper Kupp, who finally had a bounce back week. Any sort of, is there anybody you wouldn't consider playing? Maybe that's the question here for the Rams. Is there any receiver? I don't think you're starting the Tyler Higbee, I think, still out in this one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But I think you're starting the wide receivers, you're starting Kyren Williams, and you call it a day.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was scared of Matthew Stafford last week against the Ravens, and man, he proved me wrong. He was amazing, and yeah, definitely not scared of him this week. It's a much better matchup. So I have many more words on it in the offensive line, defensive line matchup article coming out tomorrow. So I will try to not let people listen to my voice about this. You can check that out for free tomorrow. But we love Matthew Stafford this week.
Love Matthew Stafford. I think he's definitely a must play. Moving on to the other side of the ball, since that side of the ball was so easy, we've got Sam Howell up against the Rams defense, allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to the running back or quarterback position. Sam Howell, he's been a I think great garbage time kind of volume play. It's translated to fantasy production, so I think again one of those low end QB1s that you can throw into your lineup. Brian Robinson, keep an eye. He, had an injury before the bye. It sounds like he didn't practice on Wednesday with that hamstring injury. So could be a spot for some more Antonio Gibson coming out of the bye. Keep an eye on that. Could be a viable PPR play. Perhaps if you are, in desperation mode, he might be, one of those low end RB2, RB3s in full PPR. Anybody else that you're really trusting in this offense? Like, it's kind of been a revolving door at receiver, and that's what's made this so challenging to project. Sam Howell's going to throw the ball. He's going to throw it a lot, but who is he going to throw to? Nobody knows.
Yeah, that's the hardest part, right? Like, I mean, if you had told me heading into the year, Sam Howell or whoever the Washington quarterback was going to be is going to lead the NFL in dropbacks and pass attempts heading into week 15, you're probably very excited about Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, but it's a completely different story. None of these guys have thrived and they've been so disappointing. So it makes them harder to trust. Like Terry McLaurin's a wide receiver 3 at best. I think most weeks now. And yeah, they've been disappointing. So you're not excited about putting them into lineups, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at. Like, Terry McLaurin, none of these guys are must starts, especially Terry McLaurin. I think again, he's one of those guys that has the name value and you get kind of trapped into the circumstance of wanting to start him because of the name value. But I don't think he's a must start in this circumstance. Sam Howell is really kind of the only guy I'm looking at here for a potential start. Maybe Logan Thomas, if you're feeling desperate. The Rams are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the tight end position, rank 3rd in yards per game to the position. Could be an interesting spot if they look to exploit that a little bit more. But again, the rotation between these receivers has been a maddening one. So kind of hard to project on any end. Let's move on. We've got a couple more games here on the Sunday slate. Let's go on to the San Francisco 49ers visiting the Arizona Cardinals in what should be an absolute beatdown from this 49ers defense. I think Arizona Cardinals, like in general, I'm trying to avoid Kyler Murray if I can. I'm trying to avoid James Conner if I can. Especially James Conner, this run defense since trading to acquire Chase Young. They've allowed just a single touchdown to running backs since they acquired him in week 10 on the ground. Not been a favorable matchup. And for a guy who, his biggest issue from a fantasy production standpoint has been finding the end zone, I don't think this is a great spot. Marquise Brown, don't love that either. I know, the 49ers have been kind of most susceptible to the air, through the air, if anything, but I think it's going to be Kyler Murray funneling targets to Trey McBride, and kind of that's it. Like, he has become target number one in this offense, and it's getting really hard to trust Marquise Brown, who just continues to kind of lob up goose eggs for our lineups.
Yeah, this has been the offense here, the passing offense has really just been a kind of a Trey McBride show. And like, even James Conner, you would hope that there would be some receiving production there, but he just hasn't been involved as on passing downs, right? He has 36 receiving yards this year. That's it. And I know he's missed time, but that was not the norm for him. Last year, he was involved as a receiver. He had plenty of games where he was over that. So yeah, this is not the matchup to be, overly excited about James Conner or Marquise Brown. Trey McBride, sure. And Kyler Murray, even I don't feel great about Kyler Murray. Hasn't been great when pressured this season. That 49ers D-line can definitely bring pressure. Murray's earned a 41.7 passing grade when pressured, which is 27th among 39 backs or 39 quarterbacks. 43.8% completion rate when pressured. It's 31st among those same qualifying quarterbacks. It's a really poor matchup here. So hopefully most rosters have better options than Kyler Murray this week.
Yeah. Fingers crossed that you do have better options. I know there's some upside in terms of the run, but I do think this is going to be one of those tough sledding matchups. Meanwhile, the 49ers, boy, oh boy, do they get an absolute delight up against this Cardinals defense that, can't do much of anything. They cannot stop anything. And now they face the unstoppable force that is the 49ers. I'm so sorry to Budda Baker and company. You're going to have your hands full here. There's no secret there. You're starting Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, who's been on an absolute tear and looking like the Deebo Samuel of yesteryear. Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, like, you're starting all your 49ers. Is there any debate there? I don't know.
No, this is super easy offense.
Oh, you're like, boom, making my job easier. I love you, Kyle Shanahan. Thank you for giving us a fairly easy matchup. Now, speaking of easy matchups, the Kansas City Chiefs, they will travel to face the New England Patriots this week in Gillette Stadium. Now, the Chiefs, they've been on a skid, right? They've lost 4 out of the last 6 games. Haven't looked particularly explosive, though their defense has been holding up, I think, better than really anybody would suspect that they would have heading into the season. Obviously, you don't love that it's a road game. New England could be a challenging environment to play in, but this New England defense, they've had a lot of success defending the run, but kind of been beatable through the air, which might be a great spot for Patrick Mahomes, Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce to find their groove again. Because Rashee Rice, we've been, continuing to see an increase in involvement from him over the last few weeks. His metrics, all of his efficiency metrics, yards per route run, yards after the catch per reception, they rank him among the most elite wide receivers in the league. Now we're starting to see that fantasy production kind of start to follow there. We're starting to see that increase in workload for him, target share. Now you obviously know you're starting Mahomes, you're starting Rashee, I think at this point, right? We're all starting. Yeah. No more debating there. You're starting Travis Kelce. The biggest question heading into this game is, what do you do with the ground game? Isaiah Pacheco missed another practice with a shoulder injury. He missed last week with a shoulder injury. I don't think it sounds like he's going to play. I don't think it sounds like he's likely. So you're going to have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who saw the bulk of the work on the ground, but they split snaps. He split snaps with teammate Jerick McKinnon fairly evenly, and you saw Jerick McKinnon get the touchdown. I think the answer, if you had to pick one of these, just given how tough they've been to beat on the ground, is probably Jerick McKinnon. And again, maybe they sub out some of that run game for, some screen passes to the running backs that I think should favor McKinnon. But in general, if I can avoid this backfield, I would prefer to do so.
Yeah, you definitely want to. Yeah, you're not going to be excited to put them in, but like, I don't mind a path here for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like, it does, like you said, Pacheco, he didn't practice today, Thursday that is, so it doesn't seem likely that he's going to go. So McKinnon, he did get a lot of snaps last week. A lot of that came in the 2-minute drill as well, so that helped him quite a bit. Even the touchdown that he got came in 2-minute drills. So I think with this matchup against the Patriots, I think there's more opportunity for Kansas City to take a lead and focus on just kind of running the ball, and give more opportunity for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So that's the path for me that I could see, at least for making him a startable option. Like, you're not going to be obviously excited about it because Pacheco's been so much better, but there's at least opportunity there for, like, where if I have to put Clyde Edwards-Helaire in a flex spot, I don't hate it.
Yeah, I think again, temper your expectations, probably just from an efficiency standpoint. Hopefully they can find the end zone. Hopefully this is just an opportunity for the Chiefs to like build up their confidence again against this defense. I just don't think it's going to come on the ground, but I'm hoping to be proven wrong, because I do have to start Clyde Edwards-Helaire in a spot this week, which I'm not happy about. On the other side of the ball, do you start Ezekiel Elliott? End of sentence.
Yes. Demario Douglas, maybe if he's playing, which again, who knows? And it's the Patriots, so there's a chance that he'll be limited or rotated in and out. So yeah, I think it is just Ezekiel Elliott for me.
Hunter Henry, found the end zone twice in their last matchup. Yeah. I don't think that's going to be the case here against the Chiefs. 27th in fantasy points per game to tight ends. Meanwhile, I mentioned before the Pittsburgh's middle of the field inside linebacker position has been a problem, especially in coverage. I think the Patriots just kind of game planned to that and they executed it to perfection. I don't think we're going to see a repeat of that performance here in week 15. Keep the ball rolling. We've got the Dallas Cowboys at Buffalo Bills, one of the best games on the slate. This is actually a pretty good game slate. I feel like I've said that a few times, one of the best games on the slate. This is a goodie. We have the Dallas Cowboys offense, who is absolutely steamrolling any and all opponents. Dak Prescott playing out of his mind, very well in the running for NFL MVP. You have CeeDee Lamb, who looks like an all-pro. Again, not a ton of questions here. I think the biggest, question remaining maybe is like temperature check on Brandon Cooks. What are we feeling about Brandon Cooks? Can you rely on him as like a wide receiver 3 flex play on the road against the Bills, or are you avoiding if you can?
No, not necessarily avoiding. Like you said, he's been decent, and yeah, I think that's where he's at, is more of a flex play. We've seen him also be more effective against man coverage this season compared to zone. Like, he's averaging 0.48 fantasy points per route run against man, which is tied for 28th, where it's zone, he's tied for 84th in that regard with 0.25. So Buffalo, they're one of those teams that play an average rate of both man and zone, but their biggest coverage weakness is when they're in man. So they've allowed 9.9 yards per coverage target. They've allowed a first down or touchdown on 58.9% of plays, and they've allowed a 22.1% explosive play rate while in man coverage. All of those numbers are bottom 2 marks in the league, so either worst or second worst for Buffalo there in coverage. So yeah, I don't hate Brandon Cooks as a flex play this week. And again, apologies for my voice ring.
Stop. It's okay. We're here to talk fantasy, regardless of your voice or lack thereof. On the Bills side of the ball, you've got Josh Allen. Obviously, you're starting James Cook, who has had 4 straight games with 100+ scrimmage yards, 2 touchdowns out of the last 4 games. Since this team has moved on from Ken Dorsey, this has been an offense that has run through James Cook, especially in the receiving game early and often, I think he is a bona fide must start every single week at this point. You love to see that kind of usage. You're starting Stephon Diggs. I think you're starting Dalton Kincaid. He's dealing with a shoulder injury, so keep an eye on that. But the only Gabriel Davis in the room is Gabriel Davis, and I don't think you can trust Gabe Davis in your fantasy playoffs. Goose eggs in 3 of the last 5 games, literal goose eggs.
Yeah, like we talked about last week with Gabe Davis, right? That we talked about him that it was bound to be a down week for him, considering his poor numbers against man coverage. And yeah, he failed to even record a catch last week. So going against the Cowboys, another man heavy defense, another one of the best man heavy defenses or best man coverage defenses in the league. Just to recap Davis's numbers against man: 0.22 fantasy points per route run, tied for 80th, 60.9 receiving grade, which is 80th, and a 1.06 yards per route run, which is 81st against man coverage. So Gabe Davis, no thank you. Maybe another time.
No bueno. Yeah. Big pass on Gabe Davis here. But yeah, that's the team. That's the offense. I think, again, 2 really, really good teams, very exciting teams to watch, 2 really good offenses. But the Dallas Cowboys defense, we'll see how they perform on the road, and how much they're going to be able to contain these Buffalo Bills, who have just looked a little bit better. Obviously you have the Dallas Cowboys who can get a little bit of pressure on Josh Allen and company, but nothing he hasn't dealt with before. So I think we're in a good spot. Moving on, let's head into Sunday Night Football. We've got the Baltimore Ravens at Jacksonville Jaguars. A pretty good game. We've got, like I said, this is like one of the better, I think, game slates that we've seen all season long. The Baltimore Ravens are absolutely on fire. 30-point games, like they're made of candy. I don't know. Like the Baltimore Ravens offense is #good. You have the inconsistencies for Lamar Jackson, just in terms of like passing volume, whether he's needed to pass versus, this team kind of grinding out the run. Odell Beckham Jr., he's, been more involved over the past several weeks. I think he's a great start against this Jacksonville Jaguars defense, allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. He's taking on a more substantial role, coming off a performance as the wide receiver 6 last week. Had, I think, just a nice increase in target share, 7+ targets in 3 of the last 5 games, a touchdown in 3 of the last 5 games. I think you start OBJ as a flex play at this point. And then Isaiah Likely, who, again, he looks good. I think you start Isaiah Likely as well if you don't have one of these upper tier tight ends.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really like Isaiah Likely this week, and coming off a nice week as well. 5 passes that he caught for 83 yards and a touchdown against the Rams. So really like that. He's been consistent in his usage and involvement in the offense with Mark Andrews out. So yeah, like Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham as well. Lamar. It's just the running backs that are the question mark, right? And I know you wrote about the Ravens backfield being a hodgepodge in your running back touches report. So we were really hoping that the snaps would increase for Keaton Mitchell coming out of their bye. There was a trend there. They were trending up, and then unfortunately it just didn't happen. So I feel like Keaton Mitchell drops down the rankings this week. I'd be curious where you're at with him.
Yeah, it feels like every single week I'm talking about the Ravens in the rushing report, just because every week it feels like we're getting some mixed results. Last week, saw Justice Hill play a team high in terms of snap total, routes run, saw a little dip for Keaton Mitchell. But like the usage has been kind of all over the place. I still think if you have to start one, Keaton Mitchell is probably the best option. But not super excited because I think you saw last week, this can be kind of a game script dependent in terms of their usage, just not a ton of reliability there for the Ravens. They're going to run the ball in some capacity. They're going to have the running backs involved in some capacity. It's just who and in what capacity will that be? And it's been a challenge to predict. How about this is like one of the most interesting offensive defensive matchups in the league this week, I think. Jacksonville Jaguars going up against the Ravens defense, which has been absolutely suffocating pretty much to every single fantasy position. Not a ton of fantasy points being scored against the Baltimore Ravens in any capacity. You have Evan Ingram, though, who's been on an absolute tear over the last 2 weeks, 2 top 5 performances. I think from a volume perspective, you're rolling with Evan Ingram. With that omission of Christian Kirk in the lineup, he's gotten a couple more routes per game coming out of the slot. I think that's going to be huge. I think from a volume perspective, you continue rolling with Evan Ingram as a top 5 option. Calvin Ridley, though, we continue to see a lot of that volatility, and I think we're going to see another down day against this Baltimore Ravens defense.
I think that makes sense. Not overly excited about the passing offense as a whole. I do like Evan Ingram, like you said, and Travis Etienne, obviously, but as far as guys like Calvin Ridley, Trevor Lawrence, like those are the ones that I'm most concerned about against Baltimore. Actually, Nick Botiford here at PFF wrote a really good piece here for the quarterback streamers to avoid this week, and highlighted Trevor Lawrence and did a nice job pointing out his numbers from last week after this injury that he's had, this high ankle sprain. So he was just comparing the numbers from weeks 1 to 13 to last week post injury. So looking at, and that was for his numbers on the run, by the way, like Trevor Lawrence throwing on the move. And they've been significant. They were significantly worse. And I know it was a 1 game sample size, but just to quickly go over it, like Lawrence 56.7 passing grade last week versus a 68.5 typically on the season. 0 big time throws versus the 7.6% big time throw rate prior. Just a 50% adjusted completion rate while throwing on the move as well, which was usually 72% prior. 2.8 yards per attempt as well, and 8.7 was prior to that. 0% of his throws were beyond the sticks as well when he was on the move, where that was at 41% prior to the injury. So again, 1 game sample size, but we've seen it already start to affect Trevor Lawrence, this potential injury here.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think this entire game probably going to funnel through Travis Etienne and Evan Ingram, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Let's move on. Monday Night Football closing out the week. We've got the Philadelphia Eagles traveling to face the Seattle Seahawks. Philadelphia Eagles, obviously, they are in a spot where they are fighting for that number 1 seed. They need to pull out a win. They need to bounce back. But their defense has been totally struggling, which could put the Seattle Seahawks in an interesting position to take a little bit of advantage, gain some yardage, score some points. You love what we're seeing out of DK Metcalf. He's been on a tear as of late. Not necessarily a great day here back in week 14, but just the week prior was the overall wide receiver 1. 2 weeks before that, wide receiver 10. So like you're still seeing some of that volatility, but I think overall, DK Metcalf going up against the secondary that leads the league in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers should be a very big day. Tyler Lockett, again, still haven't really seen that as high a ceiling as you probably hoped. And I think the floor is a bit lower. So not overly excited about Tyler Lockett, but from a matchup perspective, it could be an interesting spot for like a wide receiver 2 week. Most interestingly, I think I'm kind of at a loss for what to do with these running backs. We're not starting Geno Smith if he's healthy. We're not starting Drew Lock, but can you trust either of these running backs? We kind of saw some interesting usage last week. Pretty much, fairly even, workload split. You saw Kenneth Walker actually take on a greater role as a receiver last week than we have in weeks prior, which that's kind of been Charbonnet's bread and butter. But Zach Charbonnet kind of got like more of the work, traditional running back work, the carries, while Walker manned the receiving duties, which was a very interesting flip than from what we've seen in previous weeks. But again, that split, I think, might just make it difficult to start either of these guys. Philly a little bit weaker against the run as in the last couple of weeks, but still 31st in fantasy points per game to running backs. Can you trust these guys?
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Like it definitely, you feel better about Kenneth Walker, but I'm definitely not trusting Zach Charbonnet. At the very least, all he does is really kind of loom over Kenneth Walker's value, right? Basically, kind of keeping a cap on what he does. But it was at least nice to see Kenneth Walker outsnap Zach Charbonnet, like you said last week, for the first time in like 4 or 5 weeks that they were playing together. So yeah, that part makes Kenneth Walker playable for me in more of a flex range as well. Like he's not really locked into that top 24 running backs, I don't think, for me. So yeah, I would play him in deeper leagues, but again, you're definitely tempering expectations, and I'm trying to avoid Charbonnet.
I think that's totally fair. Now, on the other side of the ball, I think this offense is, again, kind of straightforward. You're starting Jalen Hurts. You are starting A.J. Brown. You're starting Devonta Smith. The two biggest question marks that I think people are going to have here is regarding running back DeAndre Swift, who's seen a decrease in his overall workload over the past couple of weeks. Now, notably, you had a couple of blowout games where they weren't really in a position to maybe have enough time to establish the run. Kind of got blown out by the 49ers, then by the Cowboys. And that has related or, translated to just 19 total touches for DeAndre Swift over the past 2 weeks. No team has allowed more fantasy points per game to the running back position since week 8 than the Seahawks. So I think this should be a good spot for them to reestablish the run. I'm okay going back to DeAndre Swift this week. I think he's a fine RB, fringe RB1, RB2. Am I off my rocker for it's hard.
No.
It's very hard to trust a guy who's had 19 total touches over the past 2 weeks in the first round of your fantasy football playoffs, but I think you can do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I wrote about him in the O-line D-line matchup article as well, and like you said, you nailed the reasons why we didn't see DeAndre Swift do much over the last 3 games, and they didn't run the ball that much. They were 23rd in rushing attempts per game over those 3 games, where typically on the year they're 5th in that regard. They run 30 times per game, typically, right? So that's where I think we can see the game script shift back into DeAndre Swift's favor here against the Seahawks. The Eagles' offensive line, one of the best run blocking offensive lines in the league. Seattle, they are among the bottom of the league as far as run defense graded, and their defensive line, right? So I know we've seen DeAndre Swift's usage kind of diminish here in recent weeks, but I think that advantage in the trenches plus a positive game script, that puts him back in play for me this week. I would have no problem putting him in as like a low end RB2.
I love it. Okay. I'm glad I'm not totally insane, because I felt strongly about the take, but I know it's really hard to trust some of these running backs who maybe you had a little bit too much faith in situation hasn't played to that, unfortunately, but I do think this is the time, if any. I think the last remaining question, Dallas Goedert, how are we feeling? I know not necessarily like the boom game return from the broken forearm last week, not necessarily the biggest performance that you would have hoped, but still 4 targets on the day, 30 receiving yards, was played pretty much a full allotment of snaps. So I think you can, if you don't have one of these top tight ends, roll with Goddard and hope he has a boom game. But, I think he has the same floor that you're probably seeing from a lot of these other sort of mid-tier tight ends.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you have a better option than Dallas Goedert, you probably know it already, and you're leaving that person locked into lineups. Whereas, if you're thinking between Dallas Goedert or like a Kyle Pitts, I'm going Dallas Goedert. And basically anybody after that, you kind of have a feeling already where Dallas Goedert stands among tight ends coming off injury and a little bit of involvement last week. But yeah, just like low end tight end 1 basically is the way I guess to put it.
Yeah, I think that is totally fair. Now, we are through our 16 game slate. I want to thank everybody for listening to me ramble on and on and on while we gave John's voice a rest. If you have any questions for us, hit us up on Twitter. You can follow me at Kate Magdziuk. John, I don't know your Twitter handle. I'm so sorry to shout it out. He's shaking his head no. So don't go follow John, I guess. But be sure, hit that subscribe button, come visit us, follow us on YouTube. And let us know if you have any answers. We'll put the timestamps in the comments, to go back and listen to those specific team matchups. But that is it for week 15. We bid you good luck, and we will see you next time.